Ki-Ping Lai takes his family to visit his son in Ohio.
Here, let me help.
But just before landing, things go terribly wrong. And soon they're fighting for their lives.
I didn't see any way possible that somebody in the crash could survive.
The badly burned wreckage leaves little for investigators to work with.
You see stuff and you wonder, what is it?
Looks like we're gonna have to figure this out the hard way.
What they discover is unthinkable.
Tony, what did you do?
Wait, did I miss something?
I was dumbfounded.
United Express Flight 6291 is en route from Washington Dulles Airport to Columbus, Ohio. A winter cold front has descended on the eastern seaboard, bringing freezing temperatures.
Cold enough for you?
Captain Derek White is at the helm. He's a seasoned pilot with more than 3,600 hours of flight time.
Actually, I kind of like it. Really?
Anthony Samuels is his first officer. He just started flying for United Express 3 months ago.
Starting to get the hang of it? Oh, yeah.
Flight time is 1 hour and 30 minutes. They're flying a brand new Jetstream 4100. A small twin-engine turboprop designed for short regional flights.
It's a high-performance airplane. It's complex, it flies fast, and the pilots have to anticipate what the airplane is going to do before it does it.
The 4100 is the latest commuter plane in the Jetstream series. It comes with a brand new state-of-the-art computerized instrument panel known as a glass cockpit.
Well, one of the things that's new and exciting about this aircraft is that, unlike its predecessor, which had a traditional cockpit, this had an electronic cockpit, where much of the information that was usually displayed in dials and gauges was displayed on various kinds of computer-type screens.
The cabin holds up to 29 passengers. But tonight, on its last flight of the day, there are only 5.
She hasn't had much to eat today.
Taiwanese parents Su Chu Ling and Ki-Ping Lai are traveling with their daughter Yi-Sun Lai. They are on their way to see their son, who goes to university in Columbus. The only other passengers on board are a businessman who lives outside Columbus and a 25-year-old student from Akron, Ohio. Flight 6291 is now cruising at an altitude of 14,000 feet. It's been a smooth but busy day for this particular aircraft. It has already made 6 different commuter flights through the US Northeast.
United Express 6291, be advised, just had a report of some icing at 14,000.
An aircraft ahead is reporting icing conditions.
Was it light rime?
Rime ice is a fast-forming ice that can be dangerous if it freezes to the surface of an airplane.
For some parts of the aircraft, like the wing, having ice grow on that wing interrupts the airflow, interrupts the amount of lift that you have, and it's bad news all around.
United Express 6291, he said it was moderate rime icing up to 14,000.
Okay, thanks. We'll keep that in mind.
In the cabin, the passengers settle in. Approximately 50 minutes into the late-night flight, the captain is getting more concerned about the weather ahead.
We're gonna hit the rime soon.
Indianapolis Center, United Express 6291. Can we get 1-5000 for a while?
He wants to climb to 15,000 feet to get above the icing conditions.
United Express 6291, stand by.
They had information from an aircraft ahead of them, so they had real-time information as to what the conditions were. So they weren't guessing about the right thing to do. They were actually taking action based on relevant data.
United Express 6291, climb and maintain 1-5000.
1-5000, United Express 6291.
The crew receives permission to climb and fly above the oncoming band of bad weather.
Pilots do a number of things to keep ice from being a problem. And the number one thing to do is avoid it altogether. And in this case, this airline crew was doing exactly that.
After flying for another several minutes above the clouds,
I'm in the approach chart.
the pilots are ready to begin their descent.
Okay, we'll do the ILS for runway 28 left. Any questions?
No questions.
An ILS is an instrument landing system which uses radio navigation aids to provide the flight crew with a reference point as to how they are aligned with the runway.
In the cabin, the passengers also prepare for landing.
Do you need help with your seatbelt? Here, let me help.
The commuter flight has begun descending back through the clouds. They'll be landing in approximately 6 minutes.
What are the surface winds down there again?
330 at 4 knots.
Thanks.
Almost there.
United Express 6291, reduce speed to 170 knots.
The controller wants the plane to slow down for the approach to the airport.
Reduce speed to 170 knots. United Express 6291.
It's important for pilots to maintain proper airspeed at all times. It's especially important to maintain proper airspeed as you approach the airport when you're close to the ground.
United Express 6391 on the localizer for 28 left.
6291.
What did I say?
6391.
Oh.
United Express 6291, Columbus Tower. Runway 28 left, cleared to land. Wind 300 at 4 knots. Cleared to land, United Express 6291.
Okay, if you have all the speeds, don't worry about it anymore.
Ref is 112. I gotta input that.
I did it for you.
Here comes the glide slope.
The glide slope is the ideal path that the plane should follow as it descends to the runway. The airport's instrument landing system uses radio signals to guide the plane in at an angle of 3 degrees.
That's a standard set of degrees that's going to be nice and stable where you can control the aircraft in all phases of flight up to landing.
Okay, and remarker inbound.
Roger.
Don't forget to give me my call-outs.
The captain reminds the first officer to call out altitude and airspeed readings.
1014 is decision height.
1,000? Okay, 1,000 above.
The decision height is the altitude at which the pilot must be able to see the runway markings or else abandon the approach. As the plane breaks out of the clouds, the runway's in sight.
Okay, flaps 9. Gear down.
It's okay. It's only the wheels coming down.
The flight is just moments away from touching down at Columbus Airport. Right on schedule.
Flaps 9, waiting for 3 green.
Flaps 15, landing checks.
Flaps 15, landing gear down, 3 green. Yaw damper.
Inside the tower, the controller monitors Flight 6291 as it's about to cross the runway threshold. The plane becomes impossible to control.
Tony, what did you do?
I did nothing.
And as if into thin air,
United Express 6291, Columbus Tower, do you read me?
6291 vanishes from radar.
United Express 6291, Columbus Tower, do you read me?
Give me flaps up. No, hold it. Give me flaps up.
Hold tight.
Only 1 mile from the runway. Outside the remains of Flight 6291's cabin, fire is starting to spread. And the passengers who survived know their time to escape is limited.
It's okay, honey. It's okay. I'll get you out.
I'm okay. Help her.
Keeping Lai finally gets his seatbelt undone and turns to help his daughter. Keeping Lai now searches for a way out. The emergency exit won't open. He tries the rear of the plane. The situation is critical. Leaking fuel from the crash could ignite an explosion at any moment. Finally.
Come on, we have to move.
I'll be right behind.
Rescuers rush to find the crash site. Among them are police officers from the Gahanna, Ohio Police Department.
The weather that night was cold, but it was very moist, like almost a freezing fog, mist type of night. Really sticks out in my mind how intense the fire was at the time. I didn't see any way possible that somebody actually in the crash zone itself could survive.
Keeping Lai, his wife and daughter, are the only ones to survive.
All of a sudden, the plane just shaking very badly. So I found that something is going to happen.
This is the first fatal accident involving the Jetstream 4100. For the safety of all the passengers using this plane, it's critical to figure out what happened. By morning, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, including lead investigator Al Dickinson, are on the scene.
Okay, let's make sure we got all 4 corners.
They first need to find out if the entire plane is at the crash site. If any major parts are missing, it could mean the aircraft was breaking apart before it hit the ground.
The importance of finding all 4 corners of the aircraft is if something comes off an aircraft before impact, you probably can trace it back to the initial cause of why they had a problem. So it's really important to identify both wingtips, the nose, and the tail.
But their challenge is immense. What's left of United Express 6291 is barely even recognizable as an airplane.
The fire was very intense, and it made it hard just to try to identify the different pieces of the aircraft. You see stuff and you wonder, what is it?
We've got the nose over here. We've got the tail over here.
We found all four corners of the aircraft right at the accident site.
And we've got the wings out over there.
So the aircraft was intact until it contacted the ground. And therefore, you can eliminate any structural thing that might have happened during flight.
The plane did not start coming apart in midair. But was the pilot in control? The team needs more information to determine that.
So, main landing gear hit there. Nose landing gear hits up here.
We had marks from the left gear, the center gear, and the right gear.
It's lined up with the runway, gear down, but crashes short.
What we could determine by the ground impacts was that the aircraft was headed toward the airport on a steady heading at the time of impact.
Hey, what do you got there?
As the aircraft descended, its propellers cut through nearby trees. The angle of the cut marks tells investigators the angle of the aircraft as it came down.
Okay, the propeller cut mark started about 60 feet up. Same on both sides. So it came in level.
There was no indication from the tree impacts that the aircraft actually went anything other than in a straight line into the trees and the ground.
The impact marks on the ground and propeller cut marks in the trees suggest to investigators that the pilot was in control of the plane until moments before the accident.
Okay, flaps 9. You're down.
So then why did it crash?
Hey, bring it in here.
Dickinson and his team soon find a clue, a key part of the wing.
Ice. Looks to be about 1/4 of an inch. Let's get some pictures of this.
It's the biggest clue yet.
We found a couple of instances where you could see the amount of ice buildup. That's always an issue because ice does degrade the performance of an aircraft. And you're always wondering, did that happen in this case?
A buildup of ice on the wings interrupts the airflow over them and increases drag. This results in a loss of lift.
United Express 6291, be advised, just had a report of some icing at 14,000.
Did ice buildup on the wing's leading edges cause Flight 6291 to crash?
Yes. Now that's what I wanted to see. Yeah, they're pretty banged up. Let's get them shipped out.
The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are found nearly side by side, deep in the wreckage.
Whenever there's a serious post-crash fire, it could literally destroy the evidence that's needed to figure out what happened to the aircraft. Two of the most important things on any airliner, of course, are going to be the flight data recorder and the cockpit's voice recorder.
If the data locked in the recorders is salvageable, it could break the case. While investigators wait to see if the data on the flight recorders can be recovered.
So we know we had 1/4 to 1/2 inch of ice on the leading edge of the wing.
They'll need to find out if a problem with the aircraft's de-icing system caused the crash.
Maybe it was icing.
The most important system that was on the aircraft for icing were anti-icing systems for the wings. Now that's important because, quite simply, the wings provide lift, and without lift, it's difficult to maintain both airspeed and proper control of the aircraft.
The Jetstream 4100 is equipped with a de-icing boot, a rubber membrane installed over the wing edge that inflates to break up any accumulated ice.
Rather than melting the ice, it sort of cracks the ice and the ice falls off because it's no longer able to adhere to the wing.
But damage to the wings
The boots are completely melted.
prevents the investigators from determining if the de-icing system was deployed and working properly prior to the accident.
Looks like we're going to have to figure this out the hard way.
A lot of the de-icing equipment was burnt and melted. When you have severe fire damage, you never know what's going to be testable and what's not.
We have a cold front running through here. What were the weather advisories telling pilots?
Dickinson hopes the experience of other pilots that night can help shed light on what happened to United Express 6291.
Rime, mixed icing between 2,000 and 19,000 feet.
Did any other flights fly through it?
If other pilots flew through the same icing conditions, they might have experienced a similar problem.
Yes, 2, just before 6291 was due in.
Okay, let's talk to them.
In this case, there were planes flying in the general area, and some of them landed at the airport in Columbus. So it's important to talk to these pilots to find out what the conditions were on their descent.
And it was rime ice?
The pilot of a plane that landed 1 minute before Flight 6291 was due in remembers descending through freezing drizzle.
What do you think you picked up? About a ½ inch? And it didn't give you any trouble? Okay, thanks. Hey, same amount of ice, but no trouble.
The pilot of the other plane reported similar conditions, but neither had problems landing.
The fact that several airplanes landed preceding this airplane under similar weather conditions means the weather should not have precluded a safe landing at the airport.
Thanks for coming in. So you left at 7?
And when investigators speak to United Express pilots who earlier in the day flew the same plane
and you had to de-ice
through similar weather, they report no difficulties with the plane's de-icing system.
We looked at everything that was involved in the weather situation. They should have been able to fly through this in moderate icing and land successfully. So we went elsewhere.
The air traffic controller was the last person to speak with the crew about the weather. He might be able to confirm what they knew about the ice in their path.
Okay, so take me through it.
They asked to climb to 15,000 feet to avoid icing, so they knew about it.
Okay, does anything else stand out?
Yeah, they came in way too fast on approach. I had to tell them to slow down. United Express 6291, reduce speed to 170 knots.
Reduce speed to 170 knots, United Express 6291.
It's very unusual for an air traffic controller to tell a pilot to slow down at that close to the airport. Pilots can only land the airplane within just a few knots to land it safely. So to get to that point, the pilot had to slow the airplane, and the faster he was going, the less time he had to do that.
It's a startling new clue. But why were the pilots flying so fast, so close to the airport?
Not a moment too soon.
The flight data recordings have been pulled from the damaged black box.
Did they retrieve everything?
It is a relief if you get good data from a flight recorder. The only problem is, if you get really good data, you've got a lot of work to do because they measure everything.
Investigators hope the data from the flight recorders can explain why the pilots flew in so fast and why they never made it to the runway.
Okay, this is the ice that they flew through.
Dickinson and his team have now reviewed the flight data recordings and plotted Flight 6291's airspeed and altitude into a descent profile.
Wow, 240 knots. They are screaming through this. And looks like a slam dunk.
When I looked at the FDR data, it gave me a definite indication that these guys were just trying to get through that icing condition by doing a slam dunk type approach.
A slam dunk is when a plane nears the approach high and then descends rapidly to the runway, often to get through bad weather quickly. But it's a risky maneuver.
The thing about doing a slam dunk is that you can fly really fast to get through ice. But if you don't look well ahead of the aircraft, you can easily slam it right into the earth before you realize that you've done it.
Here, they're going so fast, the controller has to slow them down.
United Express 6291, reduce speed to 170 knots.
And then, speed and altitude drop and drop and drop.
Did the pilots lose control of their plane while performing a slam dunk?
Barely 3 minutes later, they're at 100 knots. What's the airspeed supposed to be?
Operations manual says 130 knots.
So they go from way too fast to way too slow. How'd they manage that?
Investigators turn to the flight data recorder, looking for something that might explain the drastic change of speed.
It's here. They pulled the thrust back to idle, and they left it there. That'll slow you down, but slow enough to stall?
ATC said to slow the aircraft down, and that's what the pilot did.
Reduce speed to 170 knots, United Express 6291.
The trouble is that the aircraft never stopped slowing down.
There's got to be more.
They were doing all this with the autopilot on.
So right up until before they crashed, they were using the autopilot to help them land?
When the autopilot is on during an approach, it controls the aircraft's pitch and roll.
This is a workload reducing sort of thing for the pilot. If they don't have to worry about keeping the aircraft on a particular angle or particular direction toward the runway, they can focus their attention on other parts of the landing.
Here comes the glide slope.
In all the years that I flew in the cockpit as an NTSB investigator, I rarely saw pilots offload the approach to an autopilot. The overwhelming majority of the times, the pilots flew the approach manually. They wanted to do that. They liked doing that because it's fun and because it keeps them sharp. When a pilot selects the autopilot will fly the approach perfectly, but it's up to the captain to monitor and control the airspeed.
So they move thrust to idle. The plane slows down below the safe approach speed, which makes it descend. And the autopilot tries to climb.
Because the plane drops below the glide slope, the autopilot pitches the nose up to regain altitude. But this slows the plane even more. It's what brings Flight 6291 to a stall.
Tony, what did you do?
I did nothing.
What were these guys thinking?
Listening to the conversations on the cockpit voice recorder may be the only way left to solve the mystery of the crash. Did pilot error lead to the crash of United Express 6291?
Okay, let's go.
Investigators turn to the cockpit voice recorder to find out if the conversations between the two pilots can offer any clues.
Holding up for you? Actually, I kind of like it. Really?
It's the only place where we can listen to what's going on inside the cockpit.
So you're starting to get a hang of it? Oh, yeah.
You can tell from the interaction between the captain and the first officer, whether they work better or they work worse. If one guy had a bad night, just by their comments, you can tell what they're doing.
The CVR confirms that the crew was aware of the icing conditions.
We're going to hit the rime soon.
Okay, so they definitely knew what they were flying into.
The question is, how did they deal with the icing?
Since we have to descend through it, let's keep it dry as long as possible. Then we can bring it down real quick. Like so.
Okay, so the captain's planning on a slam dunk to get through the ice. Okay, continue.
Ten minutes later in the flight.
What are the surface winds down there again?
330 at 4 knots.
Thanks. Tell you what.
Yeah.
Bust the boots.
Okay, so they used the de-icing boats.
Investigators scrutinize the pilot's conversation as the plane descends past the icy conditions towards its destination.
United Express 6291, reduce speed to 170 knots.
Reduce speed to 170 knots. United Express 6291.
Okay, stop. Okay, we're here now. This is where they pull back the thrust to idle to slow the plane down.
They were too fast at what's called the outer marker to lower the flaps and lower the gear properly. So the key thing that had to happen then is they had to slow down.
Less than a minute later, they're cleared to land.
United Express 6291, Columbus Tower. Runway 28 left, cleared to land. Wind 300 at 4 knots.
Clear to land, United Express 6291.
And that's when investigators hear things start to go wrong.
Okay, if you have all the speeds, don't worry about it anymore. Ref is 112. I got to input that. I did it for you.
Oh, there's definitely tension in the cockpit.
Here comes the glide slope.
Okay, and remarker inbound.
Roger.
Don't forget to give me my callouts. 1014 is decision height.
1000? Okay. 1000 above. Okay, flaps 9. Gear down. Flaps 9, waiting for 3 green. Flaps 15, landing checks. Flaps 15, landing gear down, 3 green.
Wait, did I miss something? Did anyone hear any callouts?
The first officer's silence is revealing.
He should have been calling out altitudes, he should have been calling out airspeeds, but he wasn't doing any of that.
Okay, continue.
Yaw damper?
Autopilot all the way, don't touch.
Don't touch, holding on the yaw damper.
The yaw damper controls the movement of the plane's rudder, preventing sudden swings. Disconnecting it also turns off the autopilot.
He doesn't want to lose the autopilot.
The captain's comment, yaw damper, don't touch, and the first officer's response, don't touch, told us a lot about the dynamics between the captain and first officer. It illustrated the tension between the two of them and the lack of trust that the captain had for the first officer.
Okay, that's the stick shaker. It's stalling.
That only happens when the airspeed is approaching the stall speed. They must take immediate action when the airplane will likely crash.
The sound of the stick shaker should have prompted the captain to check his airspeed. Instead, he focuses on his first officer.
Tony, what did you do?
I did nothing.
I was dumbfounded. That's the most unusual reaction I've seen to respond to a stick shaker. captain told me that the pilot didn't recognize something that he should have recognized immediately, and his first assumption was that the first officer had done something wrong, which wasn't the case.
The investigators now listen to the flight's final 10 seconds. They expect to hear the pilot call for full power and a go-around, standard operating procedure in a stall.
Give me flaps up. No, hold it. Give me flaps up.
Flaps up in a stall? What were these guys thinking?
There is no training that involves flaps up during any kind of a go-around situation.
With its flaps up, the plane needs more speed than it normally would to get out of a stall.
The most important thing is add airspeed. You can add airspeed by pointing the nose toward the ground. You can add airspeed by adding power to the engines, or a combination of the two.
But the crew never seems to notice their dangerously low airspeed.
Up until that time, he could have recovered. But after that, he was along for the ride.
From the CVR, it's pretty clear that the captain did not feel he could rely on the first officer. It's also clear the first officer did not diagnose the need for the captain to increase the airspeed as he should have. And therefore, it's pretty clear that the team of the captain and the first officer was ineffective.
Investigators established that the crash of United Express 6291 was caused by a series of pilot errors, leading to an aerodynamic stall. But they still don't know how such an ineffective crew ended up in the cockpit in the first place. Investigator Dickinson and his team comb through United Express pilot records for background about the crew of Flight 6291.
I got the captain's records and the first officer's.
The first officer's records with the airline are surprisingly thin.
That's it? This guy's totally green. Hired 6 months before the accident. Finished training 1 month before the accident. And he's only got 2.5 hours of line experience on the Jetstream 4100.
He wasn't a bad pilot. He had a fairly good reputation, but he was not at all familiar with flying in the 4100, and he had very little confidence to state what he wanted. And that was brought out in looking at his records.
What about the captain?
The captain's records also raise serious questions about his qualifications.
Look at this. He made a habit of failing his check rides.
When Captain White joined the company 2 years before the accident, he trained to become a first officer. He failed his first simulator check due to difficulty managing the cockpit instruments during landing. More training was required.
You could talk to pilots, as I have, and ask them, have you ever failed a check ride? And it's very rare that a captain or first officer will say, yeah, I failed one. Very rare. Not because they're not telling you the truth, because it just doesn't happen. This captain failed 2 check rides within about a year.
His second failure comes while training to captain the Jetstream 4100. The examiner notes he seemed unusually nervous performing an ILS approach. But after 2 hours and 20 minutes of additional flight training, he passed his follow-up check ride and became a captain on the 4100.
As far as the training he received after failing, it was less than 2.5 hours of flying time. That to us is unsatisfactory. It's just, how much can you learn in one flight, basically?
Next, investigators call first officers who have previously flown with the captain to find out about his habits when landing.
So he usually used the autopilot while he was landing? Thank you.
When a pilot constantly uses autopilot, I hate to say he's lazy, but in reality, he doesn't have confidence in himself to fly approaches. And Pilots need to have that confidence. And in this case, it really resulted in a very bad situation.
Investigators conclude that United Express should not have paired a novice first officer and a captain with a history of failures on the 4100.
You started to get the hang of it?
Oh, yeah.
But the airline was expanding and didn't have the resources to keep up with the demand for experienced pilots. To save money, they upgraded less experienced pilots to new aircraft.
Unfortunately, the organization needed pilots to fly the 4100 because they had been expanding. And they chose to pair this pair up, and it wasn't a good pairing.
From all sides, I could understand why they did it. Unfortunately, that also had the unintended consequence of putting two relatively inexperienced pilots into the seats of a very sophisticated airplane.
In their final report, the NTSB concludes that pilot error was the primary cause of the crash of United Express 6291.
Yaw damper. Autopilot all the way, don't touch.
Don't touch, holding on the yaw damper.
An ineffective crew failed to notice their airspeed had dropped so low that a stall occurred.
Tony, what did you do? I did nothing.
And instead of increasing thrust as they should have,
Give me flaps up. No, hold it. Give me flaps up.
They raised their flaps, making the crash inevitable.
Why the captain and first officer missed the airspeed, to me, is at the heart of this accident. The captain was under so much stress, focusing on the flight path, that he didn't have the ability to take in additional information. The first officer, who's inexperienced, we know that he was somewhat intimidated by the captain. Therefore, I don't believe he felt comfortable volunteering information to the captain that he wasn't 100% sure of. I think you put all that together, and one can understand, although not excuse, why they both missed the airspeed.
The NTSB recommends more training on recognizing and recovering from a stall, and on managing high-speed approaches. But one of the more notable results of the investigation comes out of the cabin, rather than the cockpit of Flight 6291.
It's okay. I'll get you out.
The survivors indicated that they had a hard time releasing the buckle, and they struggled with it. They had to release tension in order to get the buckle to work right. We tested those belts and found when you put them under tension, they couldn't release them. So that's one of the good things that came out of this report, is the seat belts have all been replaced or taken out of aircraft that had these type of seat belts.
It's a valuable finding from a tragedy that could have been avoided.
This accident was very likely evidence of the flight crew, specifically the captain, perhaps leaning on technology too much. The lesson, which is absolutely relevant today, is that no matter how sophisticated the aircraft, no matter how modern the cockpit is, it comes down to a combination of one's skill as a pilot and also one's understanding of how the airplane behaves at all phases of flight.